Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Well, remember the film Superbad? It was released in 2007 and it dominated the box office right out of the gate. It was particularly embraced by millennial viewers. The film launched the careers of actors like Jonah Hill, Michael Cera, Emma Stone, Bill Hader, and Seth Rogen, and cemented Judd Apatow's reputation as one of the most successful film producers of his generation. Today, it remains a beloved comedy film for the fans who grew up with it, mainly because, unlike other teen comedies of that era, it wasn't afraid to wear its heart on its sleeve. Well, my guest today is Andrew Buss. He's author of AM MCLOVIN, How Superbad Became the Biggest Comedy Hit of Its Generation. It's published by Applause Books. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Andrew, you can follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Why did you decide to research and write this book about this film as opposed to, oh, I don't know, Citizen Kane?
So this is a film that has always been very close to me because I remember seeing the film the day it came out. I was 14 years old. I am part of the millennial generation that you mentioned, 31 now. So it was right in my wheelhouse. I was just about to enter high school, and I was always a film buff growing up. I always loved seeing movies, old movies, current movies, whatever kind of movie was out. But I went to see this film with my dad and my grandfather, and it was one of only two times that we had like a male bonding kind of experience of like a three generation of men.
Right.
And
Unusual. Yeah.
it was, and it was so that was always very special to me. But the film itself is one of the funniest was one of the funniest films I'd ever seen up to that point, and the feeling of being in that theater with the audience seeing it for the first time was electric. I've not experienced a comedy being shown to that kind of crowd before to this day. It
Mhm.
just everything about it just kind of checked off every box, if you will. And then when I became a journalist, I'm like, I want to do an oral history of the film, and I wound up doing that for Vanity Fair, which led to the book.
When you mentioned your dad and your grandfather too, seeing the film, you were the
Mhm.
millennial generation. Did they see themselves in that film as well, even though you were from a
Yeah,
generation?
I absolutely think they did. And what was part of the fun for me at least, I remember one of the moments that always stands out is the film's very raunchy, very dirty. And there was a part that's particularly raunchy, and it was a joke that I was able to get at 14 about 5 seconds before my dad caught it. And that was also something that has always stuck with me. I'm still very proud that I was able to catch on to it before he did.
Well, at least he was able to catch on with it. I mean, he could
Yes.
not have gotten it at all. That would have been worse. What about your grandfather? Did he get it too?
He did, yes. He got it. All of us got it. It was so much fun. It was just such a fun night that's still
It
you know,
resonates with you, sure.
it resonates. I dedicated the book to both of them. My dad's still with us. My grandfather unfortunately isn't, but I'm like I just love the idea that the decision to go see that movie over 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now, led to a book. Like I just think that that's just a full circle kind of life thing that
Yeah, no, absolutely. What did your dad say when you told him you were writing this book? And did he read it
he
when it was published?
he loved that idea. He hasn't read it yet. No. They have not read it. I just got my author copy in yesterday. So
Well, when this airs, the book will be available. So that's
perfect. So everybody go get it.
yeah. As a journalist, and you've been doing a lot of writing over the years, as a journalist, did you find it hard to separate your teenage enthusiasm of the movie from your professional journalistic abilities when writing this book?
I That's a good question. I It definitely
I only ask you
was
questions, Andrew. I try to only ask good.
I we're doing great. Yes, it definitely was something that played in my mind, wanting to make sure I did all the research, and I did try to separate it. That was the main thing is I try to approach everything from, you know, a well-researched, very, thorough area, but also my love for the movie, I wanted to make sure comes through as well. So it was a balance I tried to find. And um, yeah, I remember talking to like the director Greg Mottola about it. I told him about it when I first saw it. I think I told Jonah Hill when we talked for the oral history years ago. I think I told him about that, and he was impressed by that. He's I remember him saying, I thought you were just some jaded writer on assignment having to write about Superbad, but you really like this movie." And I'm like, I do, yes, I promise. I really like it. So
Did you find, though, as you went into more and more research about the movie, it's similar to dissecting a joke. It loses a little bit of the humor when you try to dissect a joke. Did you find that as you researched the movie more and more that it took away some of the magic of the movie for you, or did it not change it at all for you?
it didn't. If anything, it actually makes me appreciate it more because one of the things that I really enjoyed getting to write about in the book was the journey to get it made and how it started with two kids. They weren't even guys, they were kids. They were 13 years old.
As kids,
Um,
teenagers, but still.
right, they were teenagers, barely teenagers. They had just been bar mitzvahed. That's how young they were. And that was actually where they met. They met in bar mitzvah class, oddly enough. And just these two kids in Canada, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, and they just wanted to see this movie because they weren't seeing movies that they could see themselves in. And the idea of it starting there, and then it took 12 years to get made, and they spent years trying to like just going into meeting after meeting with studios, and Judd Apatow was an early he was an early supporter. I mean, even after they met Judd, it still took another no, it took 8 more years before the movie actually came out. So it wasn't immediately they meet a producer and it gets made. Like there was a struggle. And that's what I love dissecting. How do you get to that point? And then they told me about how the draft, when we talked a couple of years ago, they told me about the early drafts, how it started with them just going to the party, and then they found the heart to the movie because the movie's got such a big heart. And so that was very interesting. I loved learning about where they started and how they wound up to where it eventually got.
Did you get a sense of why they were willing to spend that amount of time, years, as you mentioned, trying to get this film made when they were past that teenage year at that point? In other words, they wrote it as young kids and they tried to get it produced, and it took years and years and years, and yet they stayed with it. So what was it? What was the passion for it that allowed them to continue to try and make this film work?
I think it was just the fact that in those interim years, nothing similar to it had been done. Like it still was in its own league. The closest at one point was American Pie.
Mm-hmm.
American Pie, when that came out, that was the first time that Seth Rogen, because in the 90s aren't like the 70s and the 80s, they're some of the greatest R-rated teen comedies. But the 90s are not known for their R-rated teen comedies because there weren't many. It was the era of PG-13. And so when American Pie comes out and here's an R-rated teen comedy, it was the first time that Seth Rogen went, maybe someone's doing it. Maybe our film is dead, before we even arrived. And I think, though, they realized after seeing the movie and pretty early on, oh, they're two completely different types of things. And Superbad always had a little more of a heart. There was, with American Pie, which is funny, there's a little more motivation for the characters in Superbad than American Pie. American Pie, it's just four guys that want to lose their virginity, but you don't get to know why. Versus Superbad, you really see the intent of like, oh, two best friends. They're moving away from each other. They're kind of drifting apart, and they're doing everything they can to stay together. Just as much as about guys trying to get laid, which it is, it's also about friendship. And that's really the core of the film. And so you weren't seeing many movies like that, like the bromance angle. Like it just wasn't being seen. So I think that's what kept them going.
Who's the one person, based on your research, that made the film happen, made the decision, let's get this produced, financed, and done? Is there one person in particular that is that person, or are there a couple of people responsible?
Well, there's a couple of people. I mean, the film wouldn't have happened at all without Judd Apatow, even though at one point Judd told me even he didn't have enough juice to get the movie made for many years. And he tried, along with the guys, for many years to get it made. He is still such a big part of that film finally getting made. Um, Sony, Matt Tolmach, and Amy Pascal are the people that finally greenlit the film. Matt had told me he got the script from Seth and Evan's agent, and he convinced Amy Pascal to make it. But the other person that Seth Rogen a couple of years ago told me about was Will Ferrell. And that's something people don't really realize. Because Anchorman was the success that it was, Judd Apatow was the executive producer. They got to go do Talladega Nights. And then after Talladega Nights, 40-Year-Old Virgin had already come out. Amy Pascal told Judd, anything you guys want to do, I'll do it. And so it was Talladega Nights and Will Ferrell that kind of led to the movie inadvertently getting made. So there's so many different people that, it was a domino effect that led to the film finally getting into production.
Once it was made, how profitable was it?
Huge. It was made for $20 million, and I think it wound up the exact number. I think it's in the 170 million ballpark, but it was huge. And the Sony marketing team really did an outstanding job with it to get it to that point, because here's a movie with unknowns. I mean, Seth Rogen was the best known person in there. Him and Bill Hader, the two police officers who aren't the stars of the film. They're supporting characters, but they were the only two people that anyone knew. Maybe you knew Michael Cera from Arrested Development, which had just been canceled at that point after 3 seasons. But beyond that, like Jonah Hill had just had a couple movies up to that point. But he wasn't a star. So what it was it was marketing. They sent those boys, the Jonah, Michael, and Christopher Mintz-Plasse, who was unknown. He had done nothing. They sent them on a press tour, and they went throughout the world promoting that movie with anyone that would listen to the point of exhaustion. Like Jonah Hill told me at one point he's like, I asked him a question and he's like, I'm starting to get kind of PTSD from the press junket now. Like that really, I think, did a number on them. They kind of ran out of gas at one point, but
I could see
I
it.
mean, it worked. It worked. They got to, I mean, that effort of just putting them everywhere on every billboard, anything, it really worked. And
Yeah, I think the key word is saturation in that sense.
it absolutely. But what was great about it was they reached the audience that they weren't going to reach otherwise, I think, by having them go to college campuses, by promoting the first 5 minutes of the movie online. And the Red Band trailer, when that came out, I mean, it was right in the early days of YouTube still. So they found the audience.
Did you find in your research that the film appealed, because you mentioned they were sent around the world, and that could have been figuratively, but did you find in your research that the film, even in other languages, spoke to that generation? If you're not an American, but you were in another country, somewhere in Europe or Asia, etc.
Absolutely, it did. I mean, because just in the same way that it speaks to people here, whether you're a millennial, Generation X, baby boomer, doesn't matter. Whatever generation you are, this film's going to speak to you, because at the end of the day, it's not about teenagers in 2007. It's about teenagers in general, and that's something everyone can relate to.
Right.
Um,
Not always in a
I mean,
positive way, but they can relate to it.
absolutely.
Right.
And I mean, one of the key parts of that that everyone can relate to, whether it's today or 40 years ago, is I think it was the production designer told me, he's like, notice the only modern technology that they use in the film are cell phones. They are flip phones that don't work particularly well. And I'm like, that's a good point. He's like, because they don't work well, they're not connected to the phones. You see them on the phones for a minute and that's it. And everything else in the film is kind of a 70s throwback. It's back. It's got like a funky vibe. I mean, the music, the title's Superbad, immediately makes you think of James Brown. I mean, it's just a throwback to a different era, but it's still a modern film. So kind of has its cake and eats it too in that case. But yeah, I think everyone can relate to it because
Yeah.
of that.
And of course, the book is called I Am McLovin, How Superbad Became the Biggest Comedy Hit of Its Generation. The book itself, as you went through and you were writing it and researching it, did one thing pop out at you that surprised you that you, of all people, didn't know?
Something I didn't know.
Right.
While working on the book itself, yeah, one of my favorite moments of the book is I talked about the press tour a little bit. I really got to learn about what happened with those guys. One of my favorite stories is I think it was in Spain. Um, when a movie goes overseas, the posters still has the American actors. Like the people on the posters don't change; they just change the voice dubbing. So you
Right.
don't hear the Americans, but
Right.
you can see their faces. And in the movie, obviously, the it's Emma Stone as Jonah Hill's love interest. And when you see the movie in Spain, that's what you saw, but you heard another actress's voice because it was dubbed. But to promote the movie for some reason, and I learned this, and this just made me laugh so much when I found out about this, they promoted it with the Spanish actors. Like she went to the premiere, but also all of the posters had her face on it, even though she's not in the movie. So you just hear her, you don't see her in the movie, but they promoted it. So learning how these other countries had to promote the film made me laugh. I mean, so that I learned. And then the other thing that's interesting are in the film, in the first for the first week, they tried making a clean version of Superbad to go along with the dirty version. And that's because version you can show on airplanes or what have you. So what they did was after they got the tape locked that they wanted, they then had the casting crew try to come up with clean alternatives and make a clean version of the movie. But the problem with that is it's just an uphill battle with a movie like this because there's entire monologues that are filthy. They on the fly, the actors have to think of new variations for, and they're not able to turn out performances simultaneously with trying to remember the script, but then on the fly change each line. Like it just wasn't going to work. And so they did it for a week and finally decided we don't have the energy to do this, like make two movies simultaneously. So that's an interesting part of the book that I got to include.
And it probably wouldn't have helped that much, other than, as you said, if they at that time on airlines or maybe television was a little bit.
Right, the TV dubs, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The book itself, when you were talking with some of the people that were involved, did you get a sense that they all stay in contact with each other all this time later, or are they go their separate ways? They may send each other a card at Christmas or Hanukkah or something like that, but or are they all kind of stay in touch?
Oh, they all stay in touch. I mean, that's what's really interesting is, and in the book I write about, they're all connected. Like Jonah Hill will do another in 2018. He did a project on Netflix with Emma Stone, or Emma Stone is still best friends with Martha McIsaac. They met for the first time on the film, or you'll have Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill will work together on this thing. I mean, everybody. It is the 6 degrees of Superbad, and they all come back around like it's fascinating. And when I did an interview for the Vanity Fair piece with Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, Evan's like, we talk all the time. Evan said, Jonah's going to teach me surfing next week. So like they are that connected. Like they all are really close. I mean, that's the thing about movies, particularly when you're young and you're in your kind of 20s, it's camp. I mean, I think I write multiple times in the book. The Apatow movies were kind of like going back to summer camp because they all come back year after year. It's a lot of the same cast, but also the crew. Like the creative heads, they all just keep coming back. It's Apatow camp. That's what it was. Like you get to see your friends again. And it's that I think those bonds really don't go away.
From your interviews and research, even going back to when you're doing the oral histories, did you find that the producers, directors, and actors in this film, Superbad, did they realize what they had after it was released, and even to this day realize the impact of the film?
Oh, absolutely. Well, they realized it right away, especially the three guys, because they became famous overnight. Christopher Mintz-Plasse went from complete obscurity. It was his first acting role. He couldn't walk down the street, and he told me a story that's in the book where I think he was at a Chipotle, and he started having like girls coming up and grab him, and then just literally like Beatles era type stuff where there's people wanting to just reach out and touch you in a like not maybe not inappropriately, but like they just like very invading your personal space kind of thing. And so yeah, they became they became very famous overnight, and they learned pretty quickly about the impact that the film had. And to this day, you can't walk into a Target without seeing the McLovin ID on it. And that's the person I really like talking to Christopher Mintz-Plasse for the Vanity Fair piece a couple of years ago. I really like getting his perspective because more than anybody else, he is the face of this movie. And he can't walk in to like imagine walking into a Target and you always see your face from when you were a teenager. Like it's not like, oh, I'm in a movie and it's popular right now. Like movies or vinyl or whatever are going to get cycled through. But
Mhm.
his face is always going to be on those damn t-shirts. So I was fascinated to get his perspective, and he's got a good sense of humor about it now. But
Maybe not
yeah,
in
I mean, like I said, they just got famous very quickly, so they all know what an impact that movie has and how beloved it's become.
you said he has a sense of humor. Maybe not in the beginning. He might have got a little resentful about it or
Well,
uncomfortable with
I think everyone goes through that, especially him. Like he is McLovin. People shout McLovin at him. He told me, I remember him telling me the worst is when he gets carded because his ID still looks like how he looked when he was 18. He hasn't changed the picture. He keeps doing it online. He's like, so he'll go to get carded and someone will look and there's McLovin looking back at them basically. And
That's great.
the thing he gets the most, he's told me was, okay, do you have the real ID? Which, yeah.
Did they get feedback again, the producers, directors, and the cast? Did they get feedback after the film came out from studio heads and others that were more prominent in the film community about how that film had an impact?
Oh, absolutely. There's some great people, some very prominent people. Cameron Crowe was at an early test screening and really loved it. And I know Jonah Hill and Michael Cera were geeking out over that. And then James L. Brooks wrote a letter, I think, to Judd, where he said he had seen the movie with his sons and with his son and his friends and his son's friends. And I mean, they apparently couldn't stop telling each other like that they love each other like the characters do in the movie. Like apparently that really spoke to his son and his friends. And so yeah, I mean, Eminem is a big fan of Superbad. Like I think on Funny People, Jonah Hill wasn't working the day that Eminem shot his cameo, but he insisted that Jonah Hill goes to the set on his day off to go to meet him just so you could talk about Superbad. Yeah, Eminem's brought up McLovin multiple times in raps. I mean, it's
Quite
just the
the
movie
impact.
that has found this audience and people love it. And within the community, film community and out of the film community. And I'm sure the studios were probably jealous. I mean, it was a $4 billion year at the box office that or summer, not year, summer. It was $4 billion within 4 months. It was every sequel. You had a Harry Potter sequel, Pirates of the Caribbean sequel, Shrek 3, The Simpsons movie, Fantastic Four 2. I'm sure Rush Hour 3. I'm forgetting so many, but every movie had a sequel that year, and Superbad was an original. So I'm sure people were definitely paying attention.
Oh, yeah. Before I let you go, what do you want people to take away from reading your book, I Am McLovin, How Superbad Became the Biggest Comedy Hit of Its Generation? What do you want people to take away from reading your book?
I think the most important thing that I got to take away while I was writing it was don't give up. Like, it's yes, it's about a movie getting made, but also the thing to remember is the movie got made, the movie was written by two kids without any connection to Hollywood, period. So it's not a book about oh these two guys screenwriters wrote a movie, they were kids. And I think that's important to remember. Seth wound up getting cast on a show that led to the movie getting made, which was Freaks and Geeks, but still took 8 years from Freaks and Geeks to the film coming out. So it's really about a story about two kids had a that had a dream to see a movie they weren't seeing represented.
And stayed with it until it got made.
Absolutely. It's about perseverance. That's what this book is about. And um, the last thing I'm going to say is somebody asked Seth, or I asked Seth actually when I interviewed him, I asked him, I'm like, did you have any idea? And he's like, I knew if this movie gets made that it would work, that people would like it. Like, that's just, I mean, you could, like, some people might say, oh, that's ego or whatever. I don't think it is. I think that is trusting your gut. And that's what the book's about is, don't, I mean, it's just about go through with it. Like, pursue what you want to do.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Andrew Buss. He's author of I Am McLovin, How Superbad Became the Biggest Comedy Hit of Its Generation. It's published by Applause Books, available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Andrew, you can follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And Andrew, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great getting to talk with you.
Same here. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.